The snow was falling thick outside Mom's Victorian house when I pulled up in my 10-year-old Honda Civic. Through the frost-covered windows, I could see the warm glow of Christmas lights and the silhouettes of my family already gathered around the dining room table. I sat in the car for a moment, steeling myself for what was about to come. This was the annual Christmas ritual I'd grown to dread. The family performance where everyone showcased their achievements while I played the role of the disappointing daughter. The one who couldn't keep a job. The one who made poor decisions. The cautionary tale that made everyone else feel better about their own lives. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, a $15 Trader Joe's special that would probably earn some subtle comments about my budget constraints, and walked up the familiar stone pathway to the front door. Victoria. Mom's voice rang out as I stepped inside, but her smile was strained. You're late, honey. We were just about to start dinner. The house smelled like roasted turkey and Mom's famous stuffing, but underneath it all was the familiar tension that seemed to permeate every family gathering. I hung my thrift store coat on the rack next to Marcus's $800 wool overcoat and Amanda's designer jacket. Sorry, traffic was crazy, I said, though I'd actually been sitting in a coffee shop for an hour, putting off this moment. In the dining room, the whole family was assembled around Mom's antique mahogany table. Dad sat at the head, wearing his best suit and the satisfied expression of a man who'd built a successful accounting practice from nothing. My brother Marcus was holding court in his usual spot to Dad's right, gesticulating with a wine glass while describing some legal victory. His wife Sarah nodded approvingly beside him, her diamond engagement ring catching the chandelier light. My sister Amanda was showing off photos on her phone to our Aunt Carol, probably more pictures from her recent promotion to senior marketing manager at Pinnacle Communications. Her husband Jake sat quietly beside her, scrolling through his own phone with the detached air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. And then there was my spot, the chair at the far end of the table, the one that somehow always ended up being the hot seat for family interrogations. Victoria. Amanda looked up from her phone with exaggerated enthusiasm. Come see these pictures from the company retreat in Aspen. The mountain views were incredible. I settled into my designated chair and accepted the glass of wine Mom poured for me. Looks beautiful, I said, glancing at the photos of Amanda and her colleagues skiing and dining at expensive restaurants. The company rented out this entire resort, Amanda continued. 5-star everything. They really know how to treat their employees when you're performing at a high level. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Amanda had always been subtle with her digs, preferring to highlight her own success rather than directly criticizing my failures. It was more sophisticated than Marcus's approach, but just as effective. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom said, refilling Amanda's glass. It's so nice to see you being recognized for your hard work. Dad carved the turkey with practiced precision, his movements sharp and efficient. Recognition comes to those who earn it, he said without looking up. Those who show up, put in the effort and stick with things long enough to build something meaningful. Another subtle jab. My family had perfected the art of making their disappointment in me sound like general life wisdom. Absolutely, Marcus chimed in, adjusting his expensive tie. Speaking of recognition, I had some big news this week. The partners at Davidson and Associates called me into the conference room yesterday. He paused dramatically, clearly savoring the moment. The whole table turned to him expectantly. They're making me senior associate, he announced with barely contained pride. Youngest in the firm's history. The table erupted in congratulations. Mom actually clapped her hands together. Dad beamed with pride. Amanda and Sarah exchanged impressed looks. That's incredible, Marcus. Mom gushed. Senior associate. Do you know what this means for your career trajectory? Well, Marcus said, trying to appear modest while clearly loving every second of attention, it does come with a significant salary increase. And my own office with a corner view. Plus, I'll be eligible for the partnership track in just 3 years. 3 years to partner, Dad repeated, shaking his head in amazement. At 34 years old. That's remarkable, son. Absolutely remarkable. Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand. I'm so proud of you, honey. All those late nights and weekend work sessions finally paid off. It's what happens when you commit to something, Marcus said, his eyes briefly meeting mine across the table. When you stick with a path and see it through regardless of the challenges. I took a sip of wine and said nothing. This was the warm-up act. the celebration of Marcus's achievements that would inevitably lead to questions about my own conspicuous lack thereof. And the best part, Marcus continued, is that we'll finally be able to put an offer on that house in Brookfield. The one with the 3-car garage and the pool. Oh, the one we looked at last month? Sarah asked. With the marble countertops and the wine cellar? That's the one. $1.2 million, but with the promotion we can handle the mortgage comfortably. More congratulations flowed around the table. I found myself genuinely happy for Marcus. He'd worked hard for his success and he deserved the recognition. But I also knew what was coming next. What about you, Victoria? Aunt Carol asked, turning the spotlight in my direction. What's new in your world? The table went quiet except for the soft clink of silverware against china. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for. The transition from celebrating success to examining failure. I'm working on some investment projects, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Investment projects? With what capital? I've been building a portfolio over the past few years. Marcus laughed, not unkindly but with clear skepticism. Victoria, you can't invest money you don't have. And last I heard you were between jobs again. I'm not between jobs. I'm self-employed. Self-employed doing what exactly? Amanda asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer would be unsatisfactory. I could feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach. These interrogations always followed the same pattern. A series of increasingly pointed questions designed to expose the gaps in my life, the ways I'd failed to live up to family expectations. Real estate development and private equity, I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jake, who rarely spoke at family gatherings, actually snorted with laughter. Real estate development, he said. Victoria, you live in a studio apartment in the old part of town. You drive a car that's older than some of our cousins. Jake, Amanda said, but there was no reproach in her voice. If anything, she looked amused. No, I'm serious, Jake continued, emboldened by what he perceived as family support. I work in fintech. I know what real estate developers look like. They don't shop at thrift stores and live in 500-square-foot apartments. Mom set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. Victoria, honey, we're worried about you. You're 32 years old and you seem to be drifting. I'm not drifting. Then what would you call it? Dad asked, his voice taking on the tone he'd used when I was 16 and had missed curfew. In the past 5 years, you've had what, 6 different jobs? 7. And now you're talking about real estate development like you're some kind of mogul. Can't even keep a job, Mom announced to the whole table, her voice rising with frustration. Still living paycheck to paycheck at 32 years old. It's honestly embarrassing. The word, embarrassing, hit like a slap. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my expression neutral. Marcus leaned forward, his expression softening into what he probably thought was brotherly concern. Victoria, I think what Mom's trying to say is that we all want to see you succeed. But success requires stability. It requires commitment. Exactly, Amanda added. You can't build anything meaningful if you're constantly jumping from one thing to another. Look at Marcus, 6 years at the same firm, working his way up systematically. Or look at me, she continued. 4 years at Pinnacle, promotion after promotion. That's how you build a career. Sarah nodded knowingly. It's about putting in the time, Victoria. Paying your dues. There are no shortcuts to real success. I could feel their collective attention focused on me like a heat lamp. Every face around the table wore the same expression. A mixture of pity, frustration, and barely concealed superiority. And these investment projects, Dad continued, his accountant's mind clearly unable to let the topic go. Where exactly are you getting the money to invest? Because based on what we know about your financial situation. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Based on what they knew about my financial situation, I didn't have money to invest. Maybe I could help, Marcus offered, his tone now patronizing in its kindness. I know some people at a few law firms downtown. They're always looking for paralegals or document reviewers. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady and it could help you get back on your feet. That's generous of you, Amanda added. Though Victoria might want to consider starting with something even more basic. Administrative work, maybe. Build up her resume gradually. Aunt Carol nodded enthusiastically. There's no shame in starting over, dear. Sometimes we have to take a step back to move forward. I looked around the table at their faces. Marcus with his genuine desire to help mixed with obvious condescension. Amanda with her practical solutions that assumed I was barely functional. Mom with her worried disappointment. Dad with his analytical disapproval. They weren't trying to be cruel. In their minds, they were staging an intervention for someone they loved who had lost her way. They saw my modest lifestyle, my job changes, my reluctance to discuss my finances, and they filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. What they didn't know was that I owned 1,247 rental properties across 15 states. What they didn't know was that my investment projects had generated over $4 billion in the past decade. What they didn't know was that I could buy Marcus's law firm, Amanda's marketing company, and Dad's accounting practice without checking my account balance. But I'd kept quiet for years, maintaining the illusion of struggle while building an empire they couldn't imagine. I'd learned early that family dynamics were complicated, and money changed everything in ways that weren't always positive. Victoria, Mom continued, her voice taking on the patient tone she'd used when I was a child who needed correction, we love you but we're concerned. You're not getting any younger and this pattern of instability needs to change. What pattern? I asked quietly. The job hopping. The vague explanations about what you're doing for work. The fact that you're living like a college student when you should be building a real life. Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. Victoria, I'm going to be direct because someone needs to be. You're wasting your potential. You're intelligent, you're capable, but you're not applying yourself to anything meaningful. How do you know what I'm applying myself to? Because we can see the results, he said. Or rather the lack of results. Show me what you've built. Show me what you've accomplished. The challenge hung in the air between us. The entire table was watching, waiting to see how I'd respond to Dad's direct confrontation. I pulled out my phone and opened my portfolio management app. The screen displayed my current net worth in stark, simple numbers. $4,247,892,156. Here, I said, turning the phone toward the center of the table so everyone could see. This is what I've built. The room went dead silent. Marcus was the first to lean forward, squinting at the screen like he was trying to decode a foreign language. What am I looking at? $4.2 billion, I said quietly. My current net worth. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room, the distant sound of Christmas music from a neighbor's house, the soft whistle of wind through the old windows. That can't be real, Amanda whispered. I swiped to the next screen, showing the detailed breakdown. Real estate holdings, stock portfolios, private equity investments, cryptocurrency holdings, and liquid cash reserves. Each category displayed current values, recent performance, and detailed asset lists. This is my real estate portfolio, I said, showing them the summary page for Bennett Properties. 1,247 residential units across 15 states, plus 89 commercial properties. Monthly gross revenue averages $3.7 million. Dad's face had gone completely pale. Victoria, what is this? I swiped to another screen showing my private equity fund, Phoenix Capital Partners. This is my investment firm. We manage $2.8 billion in assets for high net worth clients, plus my personal holdings. Mom was staring at my phone like it might burst into flames. I don't understand. This says you own hundreds of properties. 1,247 residential units, to be exact. Plus office buildings, retail centers, and industrial facilities. I opened my primary checking account on the Wells Fargo app. $327,481,692.11. That's just my spending money, I said. Most of my wealth is tied up in investments in properties. Jake, who had been so quick to mock my real estate development claims, was now taking pictures of my phone screen with his own device, probably trying to verify what he was seeing. This has to be fake, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. You can edit these numbers, Photoshop bank statements. I opened a different app, one that showed real-time security camera feeds from my properties. These are live feeds from some of my apartment complexes. Phoenix, Denver, Austin, Miami. I scrolled through dozens of camera angles showing modern apartment buildings, office towers, and retail centers. That one, I said, pointing to a feed showing a luxurious apartment building with a distinctive glass facade, is Riverside Commons in Denver. 156 units, purchased for $4.2 million in 2019, currently valued at $31 million. Jake's face went ashen. Wait, Riverside Commons, that's where Amanda and I live. I nodded. Unit 847. You've been excellent tenants. Always pay rent on time, take good care of the property. Amanda's mouth fell open. You're our landlord? One of them. I own 14 complexes in the Denver metropolitan area. The conversation that followed felt surreal, like we'd all slipped into some alternate reality where the family failure was actually a business mogul. Dad peppered me with questions about my investment strategy. Mom wanted to know how many employees I had. Marcus asked about the legal structure of my holdings. But underneath their curiosity, I could see something else developing. The slow, uncomfortable realization that everything they thought they knew about success, about me, about the natural order of our family hierarchy, was completely wrong. I still don't understand, Mom said finally. If you have all this money, why do you live in that tiny apartment? Why do you drive that old car? Bez, I like my apartment. It's close to my office, it's quiet, and I don't need much space. The car runs perfectly fine. I don't measure success by how much I spend, I measure it by how much I build. Your office? Sarah asked. I showed them a photo on my phone. A sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Phoenix. Bennett Capital Management. 52nd floor of the Meridian Tower. I bought the building 2 years ago. Dad was scrolling through something on his own phone now. I'm looking up Bennett Properties. Victoria, this is real. You're listed as founder and CEO. There are articles about you in real estate journals. The Wall Street Journal calls you the ghost investor, Marcus read from his phone. Says you've acquired more residential properties than any individual investor in the Southwest region, but you maintain complete privacy about your identity and methods. I prefer to keep a low profile, I said. Amanda was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Victoria, I'm looking at your company's website. You have over 300 employees. You manage billions of dollars in assets. How did we not know about any of this? Because you never asked the right questions. You saw my lifestyle and made assumptions about my finances. When I told you I was working in real estate, you dismissed it because it didn't match your preconceptions about what success looks like. The truth was more complicated than that, of course. I had deliberately maintained the illusion of financial struggle, partly for privacy and partly because I'd learned that money changed family dynamics in ways that weren't always positive. It was easier to let them believe I was the family disappointment than to deal with the complications that came with being the family success story. But why? Mom asked, and I could hear genuine pain in her voice. Why let us think you were struggling? Why let us worry about you, criticize you, treat you like a failure? I finished. Because that's what you wanted to believe. It made you feel better about your own choices, your own lives. The struggling daughter made everyone else look successful by comparison. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, filled with the weight of years of misunderstanding and misdirected concern. That's not fair, Dad said finally. We were worried about you because we love you. I know you love me. But love and respect are different things. You loved me, but you didn't respect my choices. You assumed that because I wasn't following a traditional path, I must be failing. Amanda was shaking her head slowly. I feel like I don't know you at all. You know me exactly as well as you did an hour ago. I'm the same person. I just happen to be very good at identifying undervalued assets and turning them into profitable investments. Very good. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't mocking this time. Victoria, you've built a $4 billion empire. That's not very good. That's extraordinary. That's once-in-a-generation wealth creation. I shrugged. It's what I enjoy doing. Some people like law, some people like marketing. I like finding properties that other investors overlook and turning them into steady income streams. But how? Sarah asked. How do you even start something like this? How do you go from wherever you were 10 years ago to owning over 1,000 properties? The same way Marcus became senior associate, I said. One step at a time. One good decision followed by another good decision, compounded over years. I told them about my first property purchase. A rundown duplex in a transitional neighborhood that everyone said was too risky. How I'd lived in one unit while fixing up the other, then used the rental income to save for the next purchase. How I'd reinvested every dollar of profit back into more properties, gradually building a portfolio that generated enough passive income to support larger acquisitions. But the scale, Dad said. Over 1,000 properties, billions in assets. That's not just compound growth. That's something else entirely. It's what happens when you focus on fundamentals instead of trying to impress people. While other investors were buying flashy properties in hot markets, I was acquiring solid assets in overlooked areas. While they were leveraging themselves to the hilt, I was building sustainable cash flow. I showed them my acquisition strategy on my phone. Detailed spreadsheets tracking every property purchase, renovation costs, rental income, and long-term appreciation. It was the kind of methodical, analytical approach that Dad would have appreciated if he'd ever bothered to ask about it. "This is incredible," he said, studying the data. "Victoria, this is the kind of systematic wealth building that most professional investors never achieve. Most professional investors are too worried about what other people think. They make decisions based on ego instead of economics." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was having the most honest conversation with my family that we'd had in years, and it had taken revealing a $4 billion net worth to get their attention. "I have so many questions," Amanda said. "But first I need to apologize. We've been horrible to you. All those comments about getting a real job, about being responsible, about growing up. You weren't horrible. You just didn't understand what you were looking at. But we should have," Mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "We should have trusted you. We should have asked better questions instead of making assumptions." Jake, who had been mostly quiet since the revelation, finally spoke up. "Can I ask you something? Why reveal this now? You could have kept this secret indefinitely." I considered the question. "Because I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of family gatherings where I have to sit here and listen to lectures about responsibility and success from people who have no idea what I've actually accomplished. And because," I continued, looking around the table, "I want to have real relationships with all of you. Not relationships built on false assumptions and misplaced pity." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of questions, apologies, and awkward laughter. Mom kept apologizing for calling me unsuccessful. Dad wanted me to explain cryptocurrency investments. Marcus offered to review my corporate legal documents, an offer I politely declined since I employed a team of attorneys who specialized in complex real estate transactions. As we were clearing the table, Amanda pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Victoria, I'm mortified. Absolutely mortified. The way we've treated you, the things we've said." "Amanda, it's okay." "No, it's not okay. You're one of the most successful people I know, and we've been treating you like a charity case." "Success isn't just about money," I said. "You're successful too. You've built a career you enjoy, you have a good marriage, you're happy. That matters." She hugged me tightly. "I love you, sis. And I'm sorry it took seeing your bank account for us to realize how amazing you are." As I was getting ready to leave, Mom walked me to the door. "Victoria, honey, I have to ask, are you happy? With all this success, all this wealth, are you actually happy?" I thought about the question as I put on my thrift store coat. "I'm content. I'm building something I believe in, I'm helping provide quality housing for families, and I'm creating value in communities that need investment. The money is nice, but it's not the point." "What is the point?" "The point is proving that you can build something extraordinary without compromising your values or changing who you are to impress other people." She hugged me at the door, holding on longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. I just wish we'd known sooner so we could have celebrated your success instead of worrying about your failures." "Mom, you don't need to be proud of me for having money. Be proud of me for working hard, for treating my tenants fairly, for creating jobs, for building something that makes communities better. The money is just a scorecard." Driving home in my 10-year-old Honda, I reflected on the evening. Part of me felt vindicated. The little girl who had been dismissed and underestimated had finally shown them who she really was. But mostly I felt relieved. The performance was over. The careful balancing act of appearing unsuccessful while building an empire was finished. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. It was Marcus. "Hey," he said, his voice subdued. "I wanted to call and apologize again. Not just for tonight, but for years of being condescending and dismissive." "Marcus, you don't need to apologize. You were working with incomplete information." "But that's just it. I should have asked for complete information. I should have been curious about what you were actually doing instead of assuming I already knew. He paused and I could hear him taking a deep breath. Can I ask you for some advice? Not about money but about how to see things clearly. How to look past surface appearances and understand what's really happening. I parked my car and sat in the darkness, looking up at my modest apartment building, one of the first properties I'd ever bought, renovated, and converted into affordable housing for working families. You start by questioning your assumptions, I said. Every time you think you understand someone's situation, ask yourself what you might be missing. What information don't you have? What story are you telling yourself that might not be true? That sounds simple. Simple isn't the same as easy. It requires admitting that you might be wrong about things you were certain about. Like being wrong about my sister being a failure when she's actually more successful than everyone else in the family combined? Something like that. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few more minutes, processing the evening. Tomorrow I'd wake up in my modest apartment, put on my comfortable clothes, and continue building my empire one property at a time. But now my family knew the truth. The question was whether this revelation would bring us closer together or create new complications. Money had a way of changing relationships, not always for the better. But as I walked up to my apartment, I realized I was optimistic. For the first time in years, I'd been completely honest with my family. I'd shown them not just my wealth but my values. The belief that you could build something extraordinary without compromising who you are. And maybe, just maybe, that honesty would give us a foundation for building something more meaningful than the performance we'd all been trapped in for so many years. The snow was still falling as I unlocked my door, but it felt different now. Less like a barrier and more like a fresh start.